I'm going to show you how to make a custom minion that will mine and collect items for you. Before we get into coding the actual plugin, I did want to show you my Build.Gradle because I am relying on ProtocolLib this time, which would be this repository, and the dependency is right here. And then everything else is paper and also the Minecraft.net library. ProtocolLib is completely optional in this. You do not need it. It's only there to do the main hand animation and the block break animation. I've created a new class called PetMinerGoal that implements goal of mob and a listener. It already implements all of the goal events, in which on start I'm just registering the events, and on stop I am unregistering them. I'm going to type in all of the variables that we're going to need, and then I'll explain them all afterward. First things first, we're going to need a goal key. This is of mob, and this will just be called key. This will be goal key dot of, and we're going to need mob.class and a new namespace key. Just plug in namespace, and I'll call this mob miner. If you're unsure on how the paper mob goals work, this key is basically just the key to the goal. That's how you get it from the mob. So for an example, you do bucket.get mob goals.get goal, you put in the mob, and then you put in the key. Next thing is a final mob and mob, and a player of owner. Now, an item stack array, we'll call it items, and a private boolean mining. We're going to default that to false. Private location of targeted block. A private location array of target list. A list of location of selected locations. A list of magma cube or indicators. A boolean edit mode. We're going to default that to false. An integer failed attempts, and the last thing is a float, and we'll call that progress. Okay, I've just organized the variables a little bit, make it a little neater. But anyway, the mob is going to be the pet, the miner, the minion, whatever you want to call it, and then the player is going to be the owner of that mob. The items is going to be the mob's inventory. This can have whatever size you want, and we'll get into that a little later. The mining is and the edit mode. So both of these are just going to be determining whether the mob is mining or if we're in edit mode, which you'll see what that does later. The targeted block, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to be the block that the mob is mining. The target list is going to be the block list in which that the player set while they were in edit mode, and the selected locations is going to be that location while they're in edit mode. That's the best way I can explain it. It'll make sense later. And the indicators, the magma cube list, it's just going to be a glowing magma cube to show these selected locations. The failed attempts is going to be how many times the mob tried to mine a block, but they couldn't. If this gets past a certain point, it's just going to stop mining. And then the progress is going to be the percentage amount value towards breaking a block. So if this is 100%, the block is going to be broken. Alright, now it's time to make the constructor, which that'll be a public miner goal. This is going to take in a mob, a player, and an integer, which is going to be the inventory size. And you can just set their respective values. So this mob equals mob, and this owner equals owner. Now the items is going to be a new item stack array, and we're going to put in this size. And this is going to create an item stack array with however many values the size is. We're going to make the edit mode functions first. First, it's going to be select location. It's going to take in a location and a block face. And if these selected locations are null, select locations equals a new array list. And if indicators equals null, indicators equals new array list. And then we're going to need a boolean found adjacent. This is going to default to false. And for all of these selected locations, if the location.getX equals the location that we put in the function, if that equals the x, and we're just going to go through all of the x, y, and z values. So if the user is trying to select a location that we already have selected, then we're going to clear the selection, and this will be if another function that we're going to make. We just do owner, we'll send a message like selection reset, and then you can play a sound. Before we move on, we're going to need another function. This is, I'm just going to paste it in here. It's going to return a list of locations that are adjacent to this center location that we give. And if you want the y values, the top and bottom. And we can also add the clear selection method. It's going to be just, it's going to clear all of these selected locations. And if the indicators is not equal to null, we're going to loop through all of them. And we're going to remove. And if you've never seen this before, it's basically the same as doing this. And then the last thing, indicators equals new array list. Now back into the select location function, remove that with clear selection. And if found adjacent is false, loop through all of the adjacent locations from the location that we're looping through, and this could be true. If adjacent location .getX is equal to the location, and we're just comparing the adjacent location to the center location, which is the location that we're trying to select, just like we did up here. And if that is equal to each other, then found adjacent equals true. Now outside of this for loop, if selected locations dot size is greater or equal to 9, and this could be whatever value you want, or you don't have to have a max value at all, we're going to send the owner max selection size and play a sound and return. And this is preventing the player from selecting more than 9 locations at a time, so the most the mob can mine is a 3x3. And moving on, if the selected locations is empty, then set the direction of the location that we're selecting to the face direction. And we want to multiply that by -1. So we're setting the direction opposite to the direction of the block face that we inputted up here. This is going to determine the direction that the mob is going to mine in. Now we can add that location to these selected locations. And the indicators, we're also going to add that. We'll get the location.getWorld spawn. Nope, spawn. And we're going to clone that. And I have found it best to subtract 0.25 from the Y to center the magma cube on the block. We're going to spawn the magma cube. And before we spawn this magma cube, we want to set it invulnerable, true, the AI to false, its gravity to false, although I do believe setting its AI also disables its gravity, but I just do that anyway. I'll set it to invisible, and set it to glowing, as well as setting the size to 1, and set it collidable to false. And at the end, you can give the owner some sound feedback. Okay, from the top, this select location method, we're inputting the location that we want to select and the block face. And right here, if that location has already been selected, then we're going to reset the selection. Now, if the location we're trying to select is adjacent to a location that has already been selected, the found adjacent is going to be true. And right down here, if the selected locations dot is not empty and we have not found an adjacent, in other words, if the location that we're trying to select is not adjacent to an already selected location, we return, and you can send the owner selection must be adjacent to each other. And of course, some sound feedback. If this is the first location that we're selecting, then we're gonna set that location's direction in the opposite of the block face value. And this is pretty much the mob is going to mine in the direction that the player was looking at when they set the first block to mine. And then we spawn a magma cube and subtract its location by 25 on the Y level to center in the block well. Now it's time for the start edit and stop edit functions. So this is going to be a public start edit. Edit mode equals a true, and a new bucket runnable is going to be created. It would be tutorial get plugin real.class, and the delay, we don't want any delay, and the period. If you don't know what a bucket runnable does, basically if you run task timer, you need to put in your plugin, your main plugin class, and the delay on how long it's going to take until this starts running, and then the period. This is how after this delay, it's going to run every 1 tick, or however many ticks you put in there, and it's gonna run this, whatever you put in this run function. And we're gonna put if edit mode is false, return and cancel. And in here, I just show a title to the owner. And this is the title I show. Just right click to add blocks. This duration right here, this is the fade in, and the fade out would be right here. I'm not worried about that. I just want this, which is how long the title will stay. And this is in milliseconds right here. And 1 tick is 50 milliseconds. So this is 3 ticks. Now to stop edit, another public void. And this is just going to be a simple clear selection, edit mode equals false. And we can really quickly add a public boolean is editing and just return edit mode. Now time for the start, stop, and continue mine functions. All of them are going to be public, and in the start mine, if selected locations equals null, or if that is empty, just gonna return mining equals false, stop edit. Now, if there is selected locations, then target list is going to be selected locations to array and new location, and that's just going to make these selected locations into a location array. Mining equals true, and stop edit. Now, a very simple stop mine function, all it's just going to be mining equals false. Now, to continue mining, another public void, continue mine. If target list equals null, or target list.length is less than 1, return mining equals false. Otherwise, mining is just going to equal to true. And I'm just going to quickly add the getter functions. Public boolean is mining, turn mining, public item stack, get items. We're just going to return items, public mob, get mob, and a quick private clear all function. It'll simply unregister the events from this class and clear the selection. Now it's time to make the tick function. And if you have watched my previous pet video, you would know that this tick function gets to execute every tick that this pet miner goal is active on a mob. First things first, set the target. And we do that because if this is set onto any hostile mob, it won't attack you out of nowhere. Now, if target list equals null, or if the mob is not mining, then if mob.getWorld, if it doesn't equal the owner's world, or mob.getLocation.distance owner.getLocation, if that is greater, you can put this at any value. I'm gonna do 8 blocks. Oh, whoops, this is supposed to be right there. Then we're going to teleport the mob to the owner. If mob.getLocation.distance owner.getLocation is greater than 3 blocks, mob.get pathfinder.move to owner. Targeted block gonna set to null, progress equal to 0, and failed attempts equals 0, and return. If targeted block equals null, then we need to find the next block. Let's make a location. First loc equals target list. We'll get the first location out of that list. Loop through the target list. If the get block.get type equals material.air, if it is a block that the mob should not break or can't, in this case air, you should always have air in here at least. Continue. Targeted block equals L, break. That'll be the next block that the mob is gonna break. If the targeted block is still equal to null, failed attempts is going to get added. If failed attempts is greater or equal to 32, that's how much I do. Again, you can change that value to whatever you want, however many times you would like the mob to try to find another block in front of it. Stop mine. And right here, it'll be update the owner's menu. We'll add that later. Now for this next part, we're gonna go through the target list, and we need to add another function here. And this function is going to be shift location. I just pasted it up in here. It takes in a location, a direction location, forward, up, and sideways. On a basic standpoint, it moves this location based off of the direction of this location. In our case, we're only going to need the forward, but I added this up and sideways just to add a little more functionality if you ever need it. Now go back up into our for loop and shift the location from the target list. Use the first location from as the direction location. Move it one forward, and like I said before, we are not using the up and sideways. Now in this, if the target block equals no, the first if, we want to return in that, and if it is not, we're going to make the mob look at the targeted block. Mob.getPathfinder.move to shift location target block.clone and the first location from the target list minus that by 1.5 in the forward direction. And I found that shifting it backwards by 1.5 blocks, it just seems to work a lot better than if you try to make the mob move into the target block. And if mob.getLocation.distance targeted block is greater than 3.5, return. Failed attempts equals 0. Make a new float. That's going to be mind speed. Progress is going to get added by mind speed, and if progress is greater or equal to 100, progress equals 0, and to do, break the block. Now you're probably going to want to change this mind speed to whatever you're liking. It could be dependent on the item that it's holding, or you can have a constant depending up here. You can make it so you have to put it in this constructor, so you can have different mobs doing different mining speeds. In this example, I'm just going to put it to 10. One thing I recommend doing in the tick function is right here, if targeted block dot get block dot get type equals material.air, then return, and then targeted block equals null. And this will make it so it updates in real time, so if you break the block before the mob does, he'll move on to the next block. Before we continue into this break block, another function is needed. That's going to be a private void sendBlockChange. It'll take in a location, a float progress, and an int ID. This function is not needed if you do not want to use ProtocolLib. Get the protocol manager, protocol library, get protocol manager, a packet container, block break, that is what I'll call it, protocol manager create packet, packet type play server block break animation. Block break get integers write 0 and the ID write 1 math.round progress multiplied by 0.09. Block break get block position modifier write 0 new block position new vector loc.get x loc.get y and loc.get z. For the players, and I like to get the players in a range. However you get the players is completely up to you. Get nearby entities by type, player.class, location, and 16 radius. For each of those players, try protocol manager send server packet, the player, and the block break, and catch invocation target exception, throw new runtime exception, cannot send packet plus block break. And we'll pass in the exception. Okay, now what this function is doing is we're getting the location and we're simply sending a block break animation to the player based off of the progress. In this ID, you don't technically need. What this will do is if you send a packet with the ID of 0 and then you send another packet with an ID of 0, the previous packet that was set that had the ID of 0 will get replaced by the new packet. And now that we have this function, we can create two more functions. One being a private boolean breakBlock, and it will take in a location. Before we make this function though, we need a different function, a private int giveItem item stack item. And if items.length is less than 1, just gonna return the item.getAmount. Int index equals -1. Int leftover equals item.getAmount. And we're gonna loop through all of the items in the mob's inventory and add the index. If leftover is less than 1, break through that loop. If the item equals null or it is material of air, we're gonna clone the item that we're giving, and from that clone, set the amount to leftover, get the item from the mob's inventory at that index, and equal that to clone, leftover equals 0, and break. Now here, if i.getType does not equal item.getType, or i.getAmount is greater or equal to i.get max stack size, then continue. Now right here where we're comparing the types, you can compare, if you're using custom items, you can compare the lore, the name, whatever you need, and if those don't match up, then continue. Now we get the amount. Int amount equals i.get max stack size minus i.getAmount. And this is how much we can actually give from the item that we're giving. i.setAmount, i.getAmount plus math.min, and this is going to get the minimum of leftover or amount, whichever number is lower. And leftover equals math.max. This will be do the complete opposite and get the max of leftover minus amount, or 0. And now, getting out of that for loop, we return leftover. And later, to do, update the owner menu. Now what this function is doing is you passing in an item that you want to give to the mob's inventory. It loops through all of the items in the mob's inventory. If it finds an air item or null, great, it's just going to set that item in there. Otherwise, it's going to add as much as it can without going over the max stack size. And if there's still leftover, it's going to keep looping and doing this process all over again. Now back to the break block. Get the block from the target block. I'm going to show you two ways that I've made this function, but there are several other ways that you can do. Have a collection item stack. Call it drops. Block.getDrop. Get the drops from the mob's main hand. If block.breakNaturally, mob.getEquipment.getItem main hand, and trigger effect is going to equal to true, we return true. Otherwise, we return false. Now in here, if target block.getWorld.getGameRuleValue, the game rule being do tile drops, if that is equal to true, then this is one of the methods you could use. But if you're not having tile drops, then it'll be right in here. If the world has tile drops enabled, a new bucket runnable run task later, and the delay will be 1 tick. For item in target block.getWorld.get nearby entities by type item.class target block location and 0.5. This is going to get the blocks that were dropped from breaking the block and loop through all of the drops in the drop. If the item that was dropped, if the item stack.getType is equal to the drop.getType, remove the item and then get the leftover from giving the item. So I thought get item stack. If leftover is greater than 0, you have a few options. You can drop the item, or you can stop the minion from mining. In my case, I'm going to get a clone from the item stack and set that amount to leftover target block.getWorld.drop item from the target block location and put in the clone. And that is only if the world has tile drops enabled. But if your tile drops are disabled, it's a really simple loop through all of the drops and get the leftover from giveItem. And if that leftover is equal to 0, you could stop mining or drop the item like I'm going to do. I'm going to get a clone from that drop. Clone.setAmount to leftover. And target block.getWorld. Drop the item from the target block and put in clone. Now go back up into the tick, into the break block after the progress has reached 100. Send blockChange targeted block to 0. And whatever ID you would like to put. And if breakBlock, if that is false, we have not broken the block, stop mine and update the owner menu, but we'll get into that later, and return. And target block equals null. And then under the if statement, if the progress has reached 100, we can send the block change with the progress. This is where we're going to make the mob's main hand swing. Protocol manager equals protocol library dot get the manager. Get a packet container. That's going to equal macket.createPacket, and the packet type is going to be packet type.play.server.animation. Packet container .get integers .write, and the 0 index mob.get entity ID. Packet container .get integers .write, in the first index a value of 0. For all of the players in range, get nearby entities by type player.class mob.get location radius. I'm going to do 16 blocks. Try to send that packet. Manager.sendServerPacket player and the packet container invocation target exception. And here I'm just going to print the stack trace. And here we're just setting the mob's ID to whatever mob we want to play the animation for, and 0 is just the swing main arm animation. There are 4 others, I believe. I'll put an image on screen and you can see what they do. That'll be it for part 1. Farewell.